Good afternoon. I decided to go ahead and post a video dealing with the legal aspect of English as a second language. Hope you don't mind. I feel like Gilligan here. Marianne and the millionaire are going to come up behind me. Really old joke. The two documents or websites, however you want to look at it, I'm posting. The first one on this announcement deals with the U.S. Department of Education, U.S. Department of Justice. As a result of a number of agreements, not so much major legal cases over the years, but just agreements, the U.S. federal government back in the 70s and 80s determined that, especially under 1974 and 64 Civil Rights Act, dealing with Title VI, deals with educational opportunities. It's not important you know those. What's important is that your second language students, ELLs, have the right to an education. They cannot be questioned about their citizenship. That is none of the business of the school. They don't have to prove that they're citizens because somebody wants to complain they don't pay taxes. They just accept them. The school is not an immigration agent. It is not meant to do that. They tried to pull that deal in Alabama in the last couple of years. Few years ago where they were going to somehow kind of scare the kids off by identifying them to immigration. That was overruled. So we want to keep our focus very narrowly on what rights the students have. Okay, they're entitled to an education. This document, Justice Department goes through, pretty much gives you, and it's 9 pages, but it's not complicated. The schools must have procedures to identify those students who have language issues as a result of growing up and speaking another language other than English. So one of the things, and I'll put a copy in there, is there has to be a language survey. The school has to have an individual, and there's a way they can provide these documents in whatever language, Chinese, Tagalog, which is the language of the Philippines. And the questions are, do you speak another language, or does your caregiver at home or parent speak a language to you other than English? That's usually the determining factor. And if that is true, then you may qualify for English as a second language testing to determine whether or not you have proficiency enough in English. They do this starting in first grade. There has to be a reliable test. And I'm going to caution you that everything here is very broad, whether it's the test, whether it's the way or the type of program they use to teach the English language learners. It's just as wide as it can be. So compliance is not particularly difficult. Nobody's shutting down the schools or doing much to the schools if they don't comply very well, as long as they attempt to comply. And you can tell that this really depends on both the state and basically the federal government, whether they are going to go out and protect the rights of the English language learners and language minorities. You can almost bet your bottom dollar that right now in this country, in this administration, that is not a priority. And I think when you look at some of these documents here, you'll notice most of the legal cases were over 4 years ago. I noticed back in 2000 that you could get a lot of free pamphlets and booklets and things under the Clinton administration, and then suddenly you could only download one copy and you had to print them yourself when we moved over to the Bush administration. So that was pretty tough going. I had a lot of stuff from 99, 2000. And as soon as that presidency switched over, I tried to hoard as much as I could because I knew I'd have to make the copies myself. These were books or booklets about how to deal with English language situations, parent handbooks, all kinds of nice freebies. They were pretty much gone from the government printing office. So there must be a test. The parents must sign off and agree to the test. You cannot force people into a second language program if the parents refuse. If the parents refuse and do not give their consent, then the students will be put in regular classes. People do what they can to help them, but the parents can refuse English second language services, as well as the testing. And I've known some parents to do that. And why would they do that? Some of them think that it's they don't want to associate with those classes. They think that their kids will be behind if they join up with those classes, and they'll never get out. It's like being in the lower reading group. So there's some people, and I've seen class issues where the parents from whatever country, this happened to be Mexico, they were kind of upper class and they didn't want their daughters associating with other kids. So it would have been working class. So that kind of comes up too. You get the class issue, social class issue. The schools are to provide a program that is educationally sound in theory and effective in practice. Again, that's very broad. Schools can provide almost any kind of program, and that's where you as an advocate come in. Because if you find that the program's inadequate, then that's where you become an advocate for the students to get better materials. Again, I want to repeat this. Same thing with staffing and supporting the program. You may find that the ESL kids, English learners, are being dealt with or being taught by a para or a staff person, a non-certified person. That shouldn't happen, but it does happen, okay? Again, that's where, somebody can file a complaint, say the school's not making a good faith effort. That usually ends in some sort of ugly situation. Okay, I know many places that do that, so don't think that you're being picked on if it's happening in your school. I always believe in trying to work from the other side to try to improve the situation, because if you're in a small or even in a large school and the people are stacked against you to make the changes, it's going to be tough. You can't twist their arm behind their back. Now, large programs are different. If they had 150 English language learners and we're providing almost nothing, that would be different. Then there might be a complaint, and people be more than willing to get involved. And that means the state or even the federal government. But again, we're coming back to what is the climate? Are those officials going to really be on your side? Are they willing to do anything? Now, I think we're lucky. I'm working on getting the person at the State Department to give us, I got it on a sheet of paper. I said it and forgot. Teresa was here before and she retired, and we got a new person. But I want to get an interview live so at least some of you can participate. You can find out who this person is in charge of the English language learners programs at the State Department of Education, because they do work. And I remember when Teresa was here before, they really made a set of modules, and you're going to see that in a minute when you go to the page. I don't have it appearing here on the screen. I'm too busy getting a suntan here. Okay, the idea is the school will provide qualified English learning staff, certified teachers, etc., to implement the program. So everything's supposed to be on the up and up, and even supplemental training for peer teachers. This is the ideal. I must say that these were written in earlier times, and all right. So you're supposed to provide staff a meaningful program. There's several pages on this Department of Justice education. You are not to segregate students. They should have access to grade level curriculum. They should be in some way. Many schools have decided to have classes that are credit bearing, because originally many years ago, people put them in English language classes for 2 or 3 years. And then the clock ran out. They were too old to graduate, or they were, they just dropped out because they weren't getting anywhere. That's why it's very important to adapt materials as much as possible. Now, with younger students, it's a little easier because they get intensive interaction, and language building skills are part of the elementary curriculum. Even if they come in, they don't speak any English. When they're 4 years old, it is generally thought that they pick it up better when they go in. Now, that's not true completely, because they don't have the active vocabulary when they enter school, but most students generally overcome that. However, when you're 13, 14 years old, it's quite another matter. They're entitled to equal opportunity, gifted and talented, athletic programs, etc., honor societies. So the intent of the law is that they are fully to participate in the program. I mentioned gifted because often people do not put them in there. And I just said a minute ago, before I was interrupted by a phone call, segregation, they're not to be segregated. Some people start a program and then they bus them over to some school and they're all over there by themselves. That's counterproductive. They're supposed to be integrated into the program, somewhat similarly to how special education is. They make modifications, but the idea is in special education, you don't ship the kids off to some place where they're isolated. The idea is that they are part of the life of the school, which I think is a very healthy thing, and especially in the case of ESL. Something I want to mention too, it talks about disabilities, etc. It's very important that students not be classified as English language learners because they have a disability that prevents them from performing on an exam. You got to be very careful with that. I can tell you, I got calls when I was first here in UNK. I got a call from a high school and they said, well, a family of 4 children came from a family and entered the school, and they've been tested and they've all been put in special education classes. I can almost guarantee there's no way that was right. If I go to Turkey or Vietnam and take a SPED test, I'm going to be in SPED because I don't speak their language, so I can't perform. So that's an unfortunate issue. Okay. Now, students are entitled to all services. They mentioned here on page 3 of this that schools are not to recommend that parents opt out for any reason. So there should be no pressure on the parents to keep their kids out of ESL or anything else in the district, because that can happen. They said, well, the parents decided they didn't want to participate, so we didn't have to make an English language program. Once they enter a program, and once it's a substantial program, they are tested every year. Now in the state of Nebraska, we have the ELPA, and that is a state administered test. They came up with that many years ago. We really didn't have much. We had some old tests, Michigan test and and a thing called the language assessment scales. And the problem was these tests, there was only one or two forms. So once you've taken it, you know the answers. So after great effort and a lot of money, a test was created in Nebraska. Some of you will know far more about it than I do. And this test is administered via computer. It's much better than it used to be. It used to be incredibly time consuming. It still takes time. And the idea is that they have to perform in order to get out of English as a second language classes. I do know of cases where kids deliberately perform poorly so they can stay in ESL classes. That is because sometimes they feel safer to stay in an ESL. They enjoy it. And that is not the goal here. These classes, these programs are to be assessed. State efforts are made to see that kids do not enter ESL and stay in there for several years when they should be making steady progress. Now, in some of these forms, you'll see the term LEP, Limited English Proficiency. That term's been dropped, and we don't use it in English second language anymore, like limited. The word limited is frowned upon. If you think somebody's violating the federal law, you do have access to file complaints or to encourage others to do so. As I mentioned, that's probably not a very good approach, not because you can't do it, but because it's a long process. And so I don't discourage you, but I'm not a great believer that it's going to work out perfectly. Now I'm going to do one other video because I think I'm getting seasick here. It's doing weird stuff to my head too. You ever notice these things? I notice on the late night shows. So I'm gonna cut this one off. Hopefully it recorded okay. I won't have to go do it again. I'm going to talk about the website for Nebraska Department of Education. Okay, and then you'll want to click on that, bring it up while I'm talking about it. Thank you.